Let's kick off with the fallout from Ed Miliband's decision to sack Emily Thornberry from the Labour front bench for tweeting a picture of a white van parked outside a house in Strood draped in England flags. Over the weekend, Mr Miliband came under fire from some Labour MPs for overreacting. And that prompted others to attack Mr Miliband's attackers for not understanding how damaging the incident is. Gisela Stewart, when you saw that tweet, the white van outside a house draped in St George's flags, what did it say to you?
It said to me, like some houses in Berkeley Green. I've seen it before. But you know, I was the woman who stood between Tony Blair and Sharon Storer in the 2001 election. There are moments in politics where a whole kind of mood and you and a particular act coincide in a way which, in case of just Emily's case, you'd say, this is really incredibly unfair. But I thought, what would I have done if I'd been in Miliband that evening? I probably would have done the same.
Why?
Because you just suddenly get this conflagration of the irrational emotions. Everybody will have put into that picture what they wanted to put in there. Because, you know, she said very little to it.
Well, all she said, she tweeted that photo as we've described it and captioned it, "Image of Rochester." I'm going to say again, what did it say to you, that picture?
It said to me, this is like part of my constituency.
Right, but did it say anything else? Did it have deep political meaning? Did it give some sort of motivation behind what Labour politicians think?
Given my constituency, there's one half of the constituency, you would have seen it. In the leafier part of Edgbaston, which is also part of my constituency, you wouldn't have seen it. So I can see why, depending on where you are, it really hit you differently.
Right, but for Ed Miliband, you say it was a conflation of all sorts of different events. But why, unless you are gripped by panic and fear, would you react by sacking Emily Thornberry from her job as Shadow Attorney General?
Because there were a significant number of people who thought that she was actually ridiculing a part of the electorate which feels left behind, particularly left behind by a party which they think like Labour should represent them. That's why I'm saying on its own you could think this was unfair. I think as a package it probably just was one of those things in politics where that's the price you paid.
What went through your mind, Douglas Carswell, when you saw it?
This is extraordinary. The party that produced Keir Hardie is now the party of Emily Thornberry. We have big corporate parties that are so out of touch. They produce people who become MPs and front benchers without ever knowing what swing voters in marginal seats look like. And when they're sent down to Rochester and Strood to try to win support, they come, like Matthew Parris did in Clacton, up against real people, and they're shocked. And this is how out of touch our big corporate parties
become. Is that what the tweet said?
To me, it did, absolutely. It was this sense
But that's because you're an opposing politician.
It's because I looked at that tweet and I thought someone was showing absolute contempt for ordinary folk in Strood. It's an extraordinary out-of-touch political system that allows Emily Thornberry to even become an MP, let alone a front bencher, and to think like that.
Look, there are real people in Islington as there are real people in Rochester. You could argue that, you know, tweeting is something we probably should leave to other people and not the politicians.
No, this is about judgment, isn't it?
I tweet all the time without showing contempt for the views of voters.
There are as real here as there everywhere else, you know?
What did it say to you?
There was nothing unusual about this house. I have lots of such houses in my constituency. It's somebody celebrating something about their identity. I've no idea what Emily meant by doing it, and I actually feel sorry for her because we don't actually know what she meant. But I know what happened within Labour. It's when they saw this image, it brought home to them that it would be viewed as being contemptuous and out of touch. And that's why Ed Miliband reacted in the way in which he did. And I think that there is a lesson in that, because in fact the Labour Party is out of touch with this group of people, and indeed you could argue many other political parties have been historically out of touch with this group of people, whilst being very happy to go to other groups and to be seen to identify with them and to ignore these people. And in my view, they have just as much a right of participation, and indeed, in my judgment, many of them play an important role in our society, and I think that that's why it touched a raw nerve for Ed Miliband. But you'd have to ask Emily what she meant by it, whether she was surprised by this vision, because I wasn't. And indeed, when I was campaigning in Rochester, there were other indications of pride in English identity that were present in a number of places in a completely pleasant fashion.
Did Ed Miliband's action actually calm the situation, or did it inflame it?
Oh, at this stage, you can't say it's calmed it, but it was a recognition. But can I just come back to...
Hang on, you said you agreed with him. You would have done the same thing.
At that moment, I went... Because hindsight's a wonderful thing. I went back and I thought, at that moment, if I'd been in his position, what would I have done? And I would have reacted the same way.
At the height of the banking crisis, we discovered banks are not very good at banking. Maybe what we're discovering is that the professional political elite in Westminster are just pretty useless.
Of which you were part, Douglas Carswell. Of course, you were a Conservative politician. You resigned, and now UKIP.
I got a direct mandate from the people. I think that's the first time it's happened in my lifetime.
But you have been part of that elite establishment. You must understand that alienation.
And I walked away from it because it wouldn't change. Perhaps, like the banks, we come to the realisation that the people we pay a large sum of money to do politics for us are not very good at politics. I think that's what this shows. The Tory party produced Matthew Parris and his sneer in Clacton. Emily Thornberry has produced this embarrassment in Rochester. It's part of the same problem.
Come on. What are MPs for? MPs are for representing the people in their patch they have been elected in order to majority them form the government and govern. I think there is a kind of undermining, and this is where the Europe debate comes into it later, of who makes decisions, have we got any control over it, which that feeds into. But just on that picture of the flag of St. George, it has made the most extraordinary journey. And in this moment, it just was a perfect storm.
Do you feel respect when you look at a picture like that and see a house draped in the flag?
I just feel completely comfortable. I don't think it's a question of respect. It is part of the diversity of our society. There are lots of different people in this country who seek the common good and who have different ways of identifying their Britishness and their Englishness. The presence of flags outside a house in that way tells me very little about the person who's living within it. It tells me that they are identifying in a particular way, which, as a politician, I ought to be trying to harness for the common good and have a dialogue with the person, just in the same way as if it's a Sikh living in my constituency who's proclaiming his Sikhism, I'd want to get him involved in the local community.
Can I just ask briefly, have you spoken to Emily Thornberry?
No, I haven't.
Will you be?
Yeah, I mean...
What, to offer your sympathy, or...?
Yeah, but just saying,
having lost her job,
you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it hit you. And there's a real.
She was in politics. She was in the wrong place.
But that's politics, you know.
Yeah.
Yep.